Hi, welcome back. I am extraordinarily excited to be here with Jan Rezab, the founder and CEO of Time is Limited. Jan, how you doing? Good to see you.
Great seeing you, Al.
Hey, thanks for being here today because you and I have exchanged a few emails and calls and got really excited about this notion that people's time is in fact limited, that we're historically been ignorant, particularly in people analytics and HR in general, around the constraints that are on people. And now with proliferation of data, we're better able to understand these constraints and take appropriate action. So, if you would, please introduce yourself and what you'll be sharing today.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Jan Rezab, and we founded Time is Limited 3 years ago. It's my second company in the last sort of 15 years. I also built up a social media data and analytics company, one of the largest in the world, called Social Bakers, which has over 500 people. And it was through building that experience that I understood that my teams just have a lot of interaction, a lot of collaboration, which was all in the cloud, all over, Hangouts, Zoom meetings, Teams, WebExes. And really there was no way to, just aggregate and understand this data. How does my team tick? How does it collaborate? How does it change based on onboarding and hiring from the inside, from the outside? And what impact do big things have on the company? Whether it's an all hands meeting, whether it's a big team building, and other activities that you just do. And we never really knew. We try to measure it in some way, shape, or form through traditional means like engagement surveys. But you can't quite send an engagement survey to someone on a monthly basis to get monthly data. So this is why we decided with my co-founder now to start Time is Limited to really help companies understand this data and understand the vast amount of it that's just sitting there passively. No one has to do anything about gathering it, but it's just there and no one's taking proper advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, again, to our earlier exchanges, I certainly celebrate what you're doing because I think it's been an underserved theme. So, we're looking at your product right now, yeah?
Correct. So we built our platform at Time is Limited with the notion that you really want to understand uh, data historically. So when you would do an analysis today, you don't just get data in the future, you get data in the past, which is quite amazing because you can kind of internally benchmark both through time and obviously in very big companies, you can look at entire divisions and benchmark internally. Um, we're looking at data from Time is Limited, the company itself. Uh, we don't have as much of a meeting culture as many of the other companies would. We are very, very small, as you can see, of a team, from an operational perspective. So if this is 48 people here and we're meeting, our worth of meeting is sort of $15,000 a month, $180,000 a year, it's not a scary number. Now imagine you'd be looking at 4,800 people, 100 times more, which is not an unusually big company. You'd be looking at 10 million plus dollars in meetings, and that's in our cadence. Now usually enterprises have a significantly larger cadence of meetings than we do, up to 5 to 10 times higher, in fact. So you'd be looking at a number of 50 million and more of worth of yearly meeting time, and that's not even looking at the cost of opportunity itself. So
Wow.
what we decided to do is aggregate data from calendars, from emails, from Slack, and just generally all the data out there. Obviously now also Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, to understand how companies work and collaborate. So we have a filter of teams that you can see and understand how different teams operate. We structure the time based on external, in-team, and cross-team time. We think this is a very important distinction to understand corporate structures, to understand the level of how far someone collaborates inside a team without having to really do a single person analysis, which we don't think companies should be doing. We don't think a boss should have someone's individual data. We think these insights aggregated on a team level are so, so powerful that you don't really have to go down to the individual, not considering even the ethics and morals of that, which we think is obviously wrong to do. And there's just so much information and how you can improve the teams and their efficiency of collaboration that, before we get to solving all of these issues, it's going to take some time.
Right. And just to level set right out front, you mentioned some of the data that you are using for this. Can you elaborate on that? Is this one instance of Teams, for example, or is this a set of activities where meetings might be taking place?
So these are our calendar and video conferencing data in this case specifically, but we also do, also show later an email analytics report, a Slack analytics report, which you can kind of combine and understand what's going on in your team. You can compare how you Slack versus how you meet versus how you email. And this is obviously a very, very different dynamic that you might have as a team. And, we built the whole notion of these data sources to be able to quickly understand and read them. We think one of the very exciting thing are our Socio maps, which this is something where you can see how teams change collaboration patterns. And again, over meetings, this is meetings in this case, but also emails and Slack. And the beauty of this visualization, again, it is team aggregated, but also I can look at and click, for example, okay, since these are meetings, who organized my engineers' time? And I can see that product leaders and data team organized my engineers' time, which immediately, let's say I have a meeting problem in engineering, which in this case we don't, I can see who this is being sourced by. So I can go maybe talk manager to manager, sit them down and say, guys, you guys are maybe spending a little bit more time, your hands should be on the ground. And this is really to build and reinforce also positive habits in the company so that companies don't meet overly too much. It's to eliminate a lot of the overhead that we think shouldn't really exist in those companies. And as I've shown, this animates over time. So we can look back at how it was, before. Maybe this was an exception for that month. So I might want to look back in the past and look at how it, got in. And this is why we bring in also, obviously, HR and team-based structures into our platform to understand how this works. Many also clients ask us, Jan, how do we do this in a privacy-minded way? It's still, there might be some sensitive data in there. So we also have sort of a sanitization proxy, which companies could put on their private cloud or on-prem, which takes the data out and basically sanitizes it for maybe you don't want us to see calendar descriptions. So it removes them. Maybe you want to pseudonymize the emails so that they are not even names or emails. So there's no transfer of personal information. So this is also possible. And we're based out of Prague in Europe. And so we have to be not only GDPR compliant, but we have clients that are regulated from the banking sector and others. So we have to be really the best of the best in terms of privacy.
Yeah, good for you. And what I'm seeing too is that this is not placing judgment on anything. It's really observing from just a compassionate point of view to see how you might improve. Is that accurate to say?
Exactly, and this is the basis of our platform. And as I'll go into deeper views, it will start making a lot more sense on why collaboration between teams and understanding sort of the different patterns of behavior are important, because they can alert you to certain behaviors that you're trying to improve in the company and certain habits that you're trying to maybe eliminate or reinforce.
Yeah, thank you.
So now, obviously, when the global COVID pandemic came to play, a lot of clients started asking us, can you guys zoom in a lot more into these online meetings? The thought that many CEOs and CHROs had was like, okay, first, is my company working from home, right? So they didn't understand, they didn't know. So we created dashboards so you immediately know, okay, I have, 80, 90% of online meetings. I have a great adoption of people, of teams joining these meetings. So I'm fine. People do work from home online, but then they really wanted to understand it, more intensively. Okay, so in terms of tools, which tools am I using to work from home? Is it Zoom? Is it Hangouts? Is it WebEx? Is it Microsoft Teams? So then you drill down, much deeper, and obviously then you can get down to, are my people assembling faster on one platform as opposed to another, and make an immediate recommendation to the team or the company. Guys, you should use this tool. It's much more, accurate for you. And again, you can see team by team how many of these events are online meetings as opposed to, in-person meetings, and the rise of it and the trends, team by team. And, and obviously as companies, we're trying to understand this much more deeply. We started understanding patterns of data that we didn't like and that the companies didn't really like, which is for example, the rise of recurring meetings. There are already quite a bit of recurring meetings out there, usually between 20 and 30% in a company. But during the COVID pandemic, the benchmarks hovered in companies all the way to 50% or even higher than that. So this might have been a worrisome trend, because those recurring meetings are usually cross-team meetings, and they're usually in a very large set of people, and they tend to grow. So if you invite 1 week, you invite 4 or 5 people to a recurring meeting, and then you might say, well, I actually needed more people. So it ends up being a recurring meeting for 20, 30 people. And if that starts happening at scale, you run into a trouble that you might be overloading your people.
Right.
And maybe because you're trying to micromanage them a bit more during the pandemic, because you maybe don't understand if this will work. And then we're seeing, in some companies, the decline in one-to-one meetings, the rise in recurring, and the rise of larger meetings. And obviously the thing combined is people don't get attention from their boss on a one-to-one meeting, and they really need to. This has been proven in studies. So this is also why we create these, other than a bunch of detailed views, why we create these alert views, we call them, or actively managed topics, where you try and understand these different habits. So if I look at the one I just mentioned, one-to-one meetings, and this view is a little bit different from the other one. The position of the teams are still based on their mutual relationships by the communication, by how close they are. But the height in this case is if they're higher on the geographical scale, it means to praise them, and if they're lower, they're to be watched. So, for example, here we see the operation and the product leaders team, and this is our company, didn't get any attention last month from their managers. Now, I'm their manager, so that's, I need to talk to myself and start giving them more attention. And obviously there's a lot of HR metrics, as there are maybe CIO or CEO metrics here that we think every company should use. When we usually show this to an HR leader, they get very surprised. They're like, wow, I know exactly what to do, with these, one-on-one meetings. And maybe there are teams to watch out a little bit more. Maybe I want to see the operational team, and I see that, okay, but in March and April, they seem to have a very good coverage. They had, one meeting each month. So this is a new trend. So May was probably busy. Something happened. So I might want to watch it in June, whether that really picked up back where I wanted it to have good one-to-one meeting coverage. So, and other things, we're noticing a lot of HR people are being very sensitive about overtime in work from home setups. So we've created a lot of views to understand, okay, are my teams having, too much overtime? And we see here that the operational team had a lot of overtime meetings over in April, probably, because of work from home. But since this team has returned to the office, we are seeing that they're now on a positive alert, which means they're in the ones to praise. So we should now call these guys up and saying, hey, good job. This is now better. And, again, you can reinforce, the positive change in that particular team.
And let me ask a question, if I may, and if it's too far off topic, please shelve it and we can come back to it. But it's this, is that Obviously, with the global health crisis, many people are working from home, and they have other constraints to their time. Kids, maybe yeah, an elderly parent, or any number of things that are constraining how much time they are allocating to work. So now, as we're in this place where, hey, we're looking at return to workplace, what is that going to look like? And in some cases, in many cases, organizations are struggling financially and otherwise. So yeah, they're thinking about how to right size the workforce. And what I've been advocating is, well, we can't right size the workforce without right sizing the work first. And so what I'm seeing here is a way to do just that. It's like, hey, if we have certain activities that are priorities, who's going to do that work? How much time are they going to allocate to that work? And then maybe, based on our financial commitments to these individuals, we can optimize our workforce and be elastic over time, as opposed to just have a hardline financial perspective. Now, does that resonate with you? And how would you advocate tackling that challenge?
Well, exactly. I think, the if nothing else, companies have learned that it's possible to operate them on a work from home setup, and they're all trying to figure out how do we learn from this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's important things to learn from it on a bad habit basis, but there's also great things we can take out of it. Forget the obvious digital transformation bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
100% of people now in offices are capable of working from home through video conferencing, which was not the case before.
Mm-hmm.
Companies really understand this is possible. And we're seeing great ideas, and we're seeing also bad ideas. We're
Mm-hmm.
seeing companies enforce work from home, for example, on Mondays or Fridays or both.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing companies try and enforce no meeting days, for example, because they're seeing there's a lot of, people have to do work sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm not a great fan of the, no meeting day. We've seen our clients try and enforce that, where it would just create that day with a little less meetings, but would put a lot more stress on the 2 days around. And it definitely would never eliminate these meetings whatsoever,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to you'd basically stress them the whole 2 other days to kind of make it work. We're more advocates of certain focus time, which you can also see in our data, that people should really block time in their calendars for focus work, where I'm not inviting anybody. Amazon does this, adding meeting with myself, right? And this is a time where no one can touch that. I want to do emails. I want to follow up, work. I want to prepare for that big strategy, or I just want to move my work forward, right? And it really depends on the profile. So you have to understand, obviously, how these different teams operate and cooperate in order to be able to apply judgment to what you're going to do and how you're going to do it.
And yeah, I love what you just shared. And I would presume, if depending on the nature of the organization, the nature of the group, that there's no kind of one right answer, that it's going to depend on what that job family is doing, what's right for the individual, given the other constraints that we talked about. Is that something that you would agree with? And two, your tool would highlight that fact. Is that right?
Well, absolutely. I agree with that. We are now figuring out benchmarking, for example, differently among teams that are structured with more managers or less managers. So really trying to compare more apples to apples also internally in the companies. Now, there are teams where certain behaviors are obvious. You have engineering teams. They don't usually meet as much. But then you have all of the people around them, product management, product marketing, data teams and others, where you really might need to understand that. And obviously this is not, the data is not fixed. If you have a very large engineering team, such as some of our clients, when you have 500 engineers, you don't want to look at engineering team as one, structure. You really want to break it down into sub teams to understand how they tick internally. And that's really when it gets insightful, when you understand the different sub-teams and how they cooperate. This is particularly important for large companies. And, maybe understanding one-to-one meetings on an engineering team level, on an entire engineering team is useful, but not actionable.
Mm.
understanding it on a set of 10, 15 teams with each one having 10 to 15 people and the same managers. Now that is very actionable because I immediately on the map, I know who to talk to, how to talk to them. So let's say an HR business partner for engineering would immediately know what to do, how to make that actionable and turn it into, change.
Yeah, well, good for you. I'm excited about the fact that you're tackling it in such a credible, actionable way. Because obviously, it's people love to talk about this, but what do I actually do as a business leader or as a manager? And it sounds like that you're solving that problem. So yeah, please continue. This is
Yeah, no,
well.
I just coming to some of those habits. We've been noticing that there are obviously larger and larger meetings. This has been a trend during the COVID pandemic. Is just more people want to join more things, and I guess it's partly because we just want to be involved when we can't do it in the office. When there's no water cooler talk. Everything is digital. What we also noticed is that it didn't move the data as significantly as we would thought had, as we would originally think. So it also means that the data before was pretty accurate and the time plan. I mean, especially if you have these teams with 50 to 100 meetings already before, I mean, that's likely the entire calendar. But we've been able to verify that now that, maybe before you had 80, 90, 95% data integrity. And now you're sure that for a period of 12, 15 weeks, you have 100% data integrity, which is obviously a lot to learn from in the future. And I think this change will feed change inside companies for generations to come, because it's the first time something like that has happened at such a massive scale in the workforce, and everybody's been through it, which means all of the companies are going through the same thing, are learning through the same thing. Yet what I don't really see today is, for example, experience sharing, even among a group company. So we would today still see, companies operating in silos, even if they belong to the same group.
Mm.
And I mean, there's so much data now, and the companies are just not learning from it very well. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, but it's surprising how little companies sometimes understand about their workforce, about how they operate, large meetings, about, for example, we call this planning ahead, but it's essentially hectic planning, which means what percentage of meetings got changed in that team for 24 hours in advance. So for example, I can see here that the marketing team, 44% of meetings were changed less than 24 hours in advance. Now there's research, again, backing this, saying, that you possibly don't want to have your team hectic all the time.
Mm.
Now we're seeing companies operate now for, let's say, the third month in a row where 50, 60, 70% of their time is being changed on a 24-hour basis.
Mm.
So at the same time, you're busy with 70 to 100 meetings a day, meetings a month with, countless emails, countless Slack messages bombarding you. Yet, half or more of your program gets changed 24 hours in advance. Wow. I mean, and managers really have the responsibility to look at this and change this behavior, top down, because obviously this is usually coming from them or from other teams demanding that attention and pulling people in, many different directions.
Oh, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, and it can burn them down, right?
Oh gosh, yes. And it's making me reflect, and the reason I wanted to interject right there on how I would schedule meetings. So my pointed question to you, how do you advocate this tool and technology and this data? How do you contend it be communicated to the workforce so they understand that it's being looked at even at a high level view? Because if I personally understand that it's happening, that's going to affect my behavior. That's going to, maybe be more planful, I would hope. But what are your thoughts on that?
So I think, so the way we've deployed it in the past is a combination of, the companies being as big as they used already many tools to do that. So they didn't need any announcement, the sort of, right. It was there already, or in some form. or shape. We've also dealt with several clients where it was fully publicly announced to the entire company on an all hands that this is happening, that teams and managers have these metrics. And the nicest thing was just the reaction to that. I originally thought, people would backfire, but, because they might have not had enough information, they would have not known that it's team aggregated and it's not to be a big brother for them individually. But what surprised me is people did come and ask your managers, but they came and asked for the insights. They said, can we have them as well? Can we see what we can improve and how it impacts the rest of the company? Because they don't know.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And so we've announced in a company of, under 1,000 people, and 20 HR requests came in. And the HR manager called me saying, I got 20 HR requests. I'm like, gosh, were people worried because, no, they wanted the data as soon as possible.
That's fantastic.
And that's great. And this is really when kind of this is how to do it, right? And we see a lot of companies out there doing full-blown individual analytics, ONA, organizational network analysis, where every person is identifiable. We're just against that. We think it's a little too much. So we think we would advocate that maybe at the first trial, company sees it and decides when and how is the right time to announce this and that it's being done. And probably it's in conjunction to when it starts distributing these insights to managers, then the teams should know as well. So it doesn't become just a thing that's hanging around there. That would be my recommendation.
Got it. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing. And I can see why there's that demand because I have it as I'm listening to you now. So please continue. What else you got?
Yeah. So, we obviously see that much more of this is happening in multiple channels now. So what we went on is to integrate things like a Slack and understanding the difference between on the right side, you see the behavior of meetings. And again, over time, this changes. And on the left, you can see the Slack behavior. So clearly, product and engineering and data, are at the sort of core where they communicate the most as a cluster here. I can see that marketing management clients are sort of a cluster there. But where in meetings, this is very different. And this cluster is much closer to each other in meetings. So this team, the product leader team, is an interface in both Slack and meetings. And they're sort of the channel between those two channels, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I probably want to understand that a bit more. And of course, you can do the same with email. So if I keep Slack and I want to compare it with email, which I can see that my engineering data and product leaders aren't the sort of a core emailing audience, but they're definitely more of a Slack audience. So I can also understand tool preferences, and obviously I can go significantly deeper into the metrics of again the sort of sent and received emails and types of them. So I can see that obviously different teams will be receiving a different kind of emails. I can do the same thing on Slack, for example, where I can not only to see the amount of messages that I send in direct messages, groups, channels, but I can see by team. So if I want to start giving, there's one of our clients has the CEO of the company said, direct messages are evil in Slack because they create a chain of silos, right? That basically the information only moves to one person. Whereas using more groups, channels, and private channels is a much more friendly way because you're not then using Slack as Slack. You're just direct messaging people. You can use email, and it's probably the same thing. To really leverage the benefit of using a social network is to use sort of more, public channels and private channels inside the business. So you get a wider communication response. And of course, there's the other extreme. What if I'm absolutely overloaded with Slack messages? How many do I receive? And if I see in March, my product leaders have received 2,500 messages in a month, that's quite a bit, right? and I can see where they're overloaded by. So again, direct communication. Whereas maybe if they would have been in a thread or a sort of channel, that might have been better for that particular time. Or again, using sort of the daytime to understand how are my different teams using it in which time. So my client team seems to be waking up a lot earlier than my engineering team, right?
Yeah. So a question that, again, if I'm sitting in the shoes of a customer or prospect, I would, ask, and I want to make sure that, it's an appropriate question given where you are with the tool. What you just showed when you talked about teams are groups or functions, for lack of a better term. Is there a way for you to cluster if they're cross-functional or across those groups, so you have these uniquely discrete teams? And the related question is that can you look at high performing teams versus teams that are maybe not as high performing, and look for kind of salient behaviors that are providing optimizing well-being and performance, given how they manage their communications? I know that was a long question, but I'm sure you could pick up on the sentiment behind it.
So again, we can slice and dice the data in any way. So we have a client that has both the official org structure in the traditional way, but they also have agile tribes and agile chapters. So we can put in all three structures inside a project and generate, many reports, one based on the sort of the chapter channel type way, or do it with the agile tribe structures, or do it with the official org chart. What eventually I believe the HR managers and leaders are going to use this for is also optimizing organizational design.
Absolutely.
So we wrote a lovely white paper about actually using passive data to understand agile transformations. And it's, to my knowledge, is the first time anyone's ever used passive data through understanding of the networks and the attention that people give to their networks inside the company to understand an agile transformation. How does a tribe behave as opposed to before the agile transformation? And this is extremely exciting because, you can't survey teams in companies on a monthly basis if you're making a big change. So the radar is really missing. And if you don't understand, you can't manage, the transformation if your next data point is going to be in 6 months.
Right. And even if you capture that data, you're getting one person's perspective on the system, not the system-wide perspective. Is that how you're looking at it as well?
Exactly. And maybe, there can be also a lot of false positives or false negatives. And the thing is, this data doesn't lie. If I want to understand, how does management organize meetings and whose meetings they organize, I either look at the map, or if I need a volume of the meetings organized, I look at this, organizing departments view. If I need to understand how many meetings per capita do my different teams have, I look at the data, right? If I want to understand how many recurring events are there in the company, again, I look at the data and I see even we went to 37% recurring meetings here. And I can see which teams it's being driven by. So, and a fun metric that we like using across clients is declination rates to meetings, right? So we've noticed that people in corporations don't decline meetings. And originally we didn't think of the metric as anything, but then we noticed that our tech sector of clients has a declination rate of 5 to 15%. Actually, it's more like 8 to 15. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But the corporations had 1, 2, or 3%, virtually zero declinations to any meetings. You don't decline meetings, you just go. And you accept most of them. And so we tried some programs with our clients and saying, why don't you just enforce that people can cancel meetings? Just say it's the company's official motto culture. If you're not valuable in a meeting, just cancel it. And declination rates jumped 10%, 15% in big enterprises, big corporations, traditional companies.
Wow.
And so it really is about enforcing, positive behavior. If you don't think you should be on the meeting, just decline, and I think the risk of this work from home part is that companies will not learn. And when I'm asking the companies, like, what was the good behavior you saw? We saw all hands meetings with 100 plus people being, quickly assembled. We had 2 minutes assembly, then we were all out in 25, 30 minutes because people got out what they needed and they got out of the meeting. Now, if you assemble a meeting like that in person, 30, 40% of the people might show up. They'll show up X minutes late. It'll be a 1 hour meeting with gosh knows how many logistics, right? 20 minutes getting there, 20 minutes going back. So you lose a lot of time. And I really think that in this time, we should look at data, understand how to change my business. How do I want to change it moving forward? What is the new way of working, right? Because we're not going back to the old way, but what is the new normal? And measure against that on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
Because today when we look at the data, it's funny when we onboard a client, sometimes, coming from the CEO or CIO, and either the CIO is a little resilient or hesitant at first, and the CHRO might not be that data savvy. But when they see this data and they see what value it brings, it becomes their best friend. And we've had HR people that were never used data in their life, never used an analytics platform in their life, that are now using this platform on a 2-3 hour basis every month. When they get those reports in the first week of the month, they're always there looking at their specific views, trying to understand, asking us for more views, more data, more insights. And that's what we try and do.
Well, I mean, good for you. And it's not surprising because this is actually, to your earlier point, reflecting what's actually happening. It's not manipulated or manipulatable, arguably, because you can't do that in mass unless you're really trying to do a culture change. And I just want to ask a clarifying question about like the individual, because historically I've seen in many organizations that people want to be in meetings just to be informed, just to listen in. But particularly given this new normal that we're entering into and trying to figure out, there has to be arguably a heightened level of trust that, hey, I don't have to be in all these meetings, and I need to trust my colleagues to get that done, and I will be a customer of that output, or once I deliver my output, that they will handle that responsibly. So this might be a coaching mechanism to say, hey, this is the way culturally we're going to work. This is the way similar teams have optimized their output and well-being. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Exactly. We're seeing the data that first it's being used by the leadership team, and then it moves to agile transformation leaders, coaches in the company, HR business partners, which then hand in hand with the leaders start making the changes. And that's really what you want. And this is how you're going to drive that change. If you spend $1 million worth of meeting time on a monthly basis, and you can eliminate just 10% of those meetings, that's over $1 million a year, saved. And that's real money. And that's not even considering the fact that you're freeing up people to do something more. And maybe these people invest half of that time back to you, and half of that maybe they keep for themselves, some of them. Yeah. But that means you'll have a more healthy, less burnt out workforce. And they'll just like working for you better. Yeah. And I think that, really, a few years back, there was like, big companies should start behaving like startups. Well, we're seeing startups today behave like big companies, scale-ups that behave almost like an enterprise. And we're seeing enterprise, big corporates, start behaving really like startups. And I think COVID hit a reset button on everything. And we should use that to our advantage as society and learn from it. And data is the way to kind of follow that.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So I see you have another screen up. What else you got for us?
Also, companies can really compare sort of how they operated before, COVID. And as you can see on the right side, this was all in person. And as you can see, this starts shifting where during March, when everybody starts working from home, everything here kind of disappears and everything is on online meetings.
Yeah.
And again, to the work from home part, not understanding how the online meetings shape your teams around. It's really, I couldn't imagine today, even running our fairly small company with tens of people without that data, even though in this size you usually know. But I could not absolutely imagine running a 500, 5,000, 50,000 person company without understanding. And it's overwhelmingly surprising how when you show this data to the big companies, they really had no idea,
Yeah.
really had no idea how they operate. And this is stunning. It's just, how come? Right? And we don't have the many time to go to the all the detailed views we have into understanding the real structure of the meetings. Are my big meetings really increasing? Do I look at the recurring ones? Are they bigger? Are they not? And really, you can slice and dice the data in any way, in any month, with any team. And this is the best part about it. So,
Well,
uh,
Jan, congratulations to you. Congratulations to your team. This is an extremely important topic because we've touched on this throughout. This is not only about organizational or team productivity, it's about well-being, right? It's about understanding what people can do. And in HR and in organizational planning in general, we frankly have not appreciated the reality that without trying to be cute, our time is limited, that we do have constraints. And so I applaud what you're doing. I applaud how you're doing it. And so how can listeners and viewers learn more about you and what you're doing?
Absolutely. So they can, drop us a note on timeisltd.com, and we'll contact them immediately. Or just write us a tweet note, message in any of the obvious channels or LinkedIn, and we'll be in touch. And we hope that we can help them as well, like we helped our other clients.
All right. Well, again, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing, and we'll see you soon, I hope. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Al.
All right, yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.